There are reports that the Brazilian military is possibly preparing to support current President Jair Bolsonaro by invoking Article 142. According to the Brazilian Constitution, this means when there are disputes between government branches that disrupt society, it's up to the military to restore order. And Brazilians aren't rolling over. The massive protests in Brazil are still going strong before Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva takes power again. Brazil's weaponized Supreme Court is already acknowledging Lula as the supposed winner of the presidential race. The results are scheduled to be certified on December the 19th. Brazilian Vice President and General Hamilton Mourão said the Brazilian Supreme Court is ignoring the Constitution, which could mean the military needs to step in and restore order. Let's welcome back journalist Matthew Tyrmand, who has been following this, reporting on this very closely, discuss the latest. Matthew, how likely is it that the military invokes the specific article of the Brazilian Constitution?
Well, good to be back with you. I think you and only a couple others are covering what I think is the most important global geopolitical story, certainly for our hemisphere, but really against totalitarianism. Obviously, we're all watching China, and this is really fascinating to see the Chinese potentially rise up. But in Brazil, which is a democracy, the sixth largest country in the world, 220 million people, the third largest by GDP in our hemisphere, and one that has been fighting, especially when they elected Bolsonaro, coming off of these terms of presidency of Lula, of Dilma, who took over after Lula was convicted, and then Temer after Dilma was convicted and impeached. The issue for Brazilians is also fighting the Chinese and their imperial hegemonic ambitions in our hemisphere. Resource extraction. The military is aware of this. The military is firmly on the side of protecting Brazilian sovereignty. It's tough to handicap what they will do, when they will do it, and how they will do it, whether it'll be Article 142 or not. Article 142 seems to be the constitutional predicate that sets them up best to intervene because it states, and this is obviously disputed jurisprudentially in Brazil, but most people understand it to be if there is a dispute between the separated powers, it's the Brazilian military's job to restore order. And don't forget that on the Brazilian flag, it says the words order and progress. It's a society that, like much of Latin America, has come out of a rough 20th century of dictatorships. And the faith in the military is very, very high because, as it says strictly, specifically in the Constitution, the military is the institution in society that is most governed by hierarchy, discipline, and order. So I do believe that should the military act, it will be via Article 142. And I do believe that the military will act and has to act because they're students of the dictatorships and the sort of semi-modern history. And they know that if there's a communist incursion into Brazil let in through the back door, as it was attempted in 2012 via this triumvirate, Lula, Dilma, Temer, the military is the one that suffered. They'll be the ones knowing, communist history. They'll be going to the gulags first. So I do believe that they're well motivated. Yeah. You see General Hamilton Mourão, who's one of the most well-respected political career military men, along with Bolsonaro. Don't forget that Bolsonaro his career grew up as a career military man. He then entered Congress, and it's funny to watch his congressional career from 10, 12 years ago. He was the one in Congress pushing legislation for auditable and paper ballots. And Dilma, when he led this legislation, spearheaded it, Brazilian Congress, who usually can't agree on anything, did actually overwhelmingly vote to push through this legislation. Dilma vetoed it. It was sent back to the Brazilian Congress, and they overrode her veto, which is something that rarely happens between the Brazilian legislative branch and the executive. And when they overrode the veto, then the Supreme Court of Brazil struck the legislation on privacy grounds. Dilma had suggested that the legislation was too onerous because then they would have to buy printers for the polling sites. When was the last time you ever saw a socialist, fly away in the face of spending more money? So obviously there was an alternative motivation there. They knew that they were going to try and put fixes in. Latin America is filled with fraudulent elections over the last 20, 30 years. Obviously, we all know about Chavez in Venezuela and then Maduro. So I do believe the military will act. They've given us cues. They gave us, we spoke about Hamilton Morale's statement, which I believe you don't say that on social media unilaterally a week and a half ago, last Friday, saying that the Constitution is being eviscerated, I'm paraphrasing, by the court. And then yesterday he posted a historical sort of footnote remembrance. Yesterday was the 72nd anniversary of 1935 when Brazilian communists tried to take over the government and they were thwacked down. And he said that this is something that will continue to happen and we will be on guard against this, which I think is a big cue saying we know what's going on and we are getting poised and ready to act. There have been other indications as well. The Brazilian military commandants in local and regional barracks where many of the protesters are protesting, and recall it's day 29 of protests that the global mainstream media will not mention, will not cover. I speak to my friends in Europe. They don't even know what's going on. They just assume that it was over. Lula won and he'll be certified and he'll take the seat. But the military commandants in the barracks are saying it is our job to protect the protesters. They are acting within their constitutional rights, within the boundaries of Brazilian law, as the court is trying to neuter them every which way, including now trying to go after their children, fining the truckers and their businesses, and even revoking passports, suspending the issuance of new passports, as if to say there's no escape. So I think it's very, very fluid, very interesting, but the people are really galvanized and the military is very clearly with the people. Police and military, when they're off duty, are marching in these manifestations all over the country.
Oh, that's really interesting. Matt, we have about 40 more seconds. I want to ask you, what happens if they invoke Article 142? Is there a do-over election? How do they proceed?
Well, it depends on to what degree they can prove it. Very important for us to discuss quickly Valdemar Doneta and this petition. And we have to be, for clarity's sake, it wasn't Bolsonaro who petitioned the court. Bolsonaro, as the sitting executive, he does not play partisan party politics. It was the party he's aligned with, PL, the Liberal Party, that the head of it petitioned the court with this report saying we should be annulling these votes from these machines, that we cannot audit, we cannot tell the tabulation trail. And then the court said, we're going to find this guy and we're going to put him on our fake news criminal investigation list. So they're trying to ensnare one of the longest serving, almost an establishment politician. This is not just like a populist flash in the pan political figure. Valdemar Doneta has been around for generations. And now they're saying he's a criminal for suggesting what he's suggesting, doing his job as a party leader when there's obvious chicanery underfoot with these machines and with this election tabulation. What eventually happens, should the military take action? My guess is they would arrest judges. My guess is they would say, we have proof that these machines have fraudulent code in them, and we're taking action. And I don't think mass protests on that. There are no Lula supporters counter-protesting in the streets. Since when have Marxist leftist radicals not protested? Well, now they're not protesting, which tells you their support is not that great. Society is in the camp of this election was stolen, and they do not want to see Lula seated.
That is very important context, Matt. You're exactly right. When have Marxists not taken to the streets? Very, very interesting. We'll keep a watch on it, and we'll expect that we'll talk to you again very soon once we know what the military does plan to do. Thanks, Matt. Always good to see you.